All right, so Exhalation by Ted Chiang. This is a new sci-fi author to me, a new short story collection to me, and a new favorite. So let's get into, whether or not you should pick up this book, if it will give you the joy it's given me. All right? So what is Ted Chiang's Exhalation? It is a collection of science fiction short stories, and as I've been talking about, as I've recently been diving into short story collections, I like short story collections that tackle a specific theme, because with short stories you can't really get super grounded into a world or character set, but you can get grounded into themes because you can approach themes from so many different perspectives, and this one delivers in what I want in that way from short stories. Ted Chiang is the author of the story that inspired the movie Arrival. Now, I didn't know that when I saw Arrival. I just like sci-fi movies with aliens. And oh my goodness, if you haven't seen that movie, you need to see that movie. But the storytelling, I don't think I'd ever approached the idea of an alien invasion from that angle. And Ted Chiang continues to surprise me with his approach to familiar sci-fi tropes from his unique perspectives in these stories. And they are thought-provoking, and they are realistic, and I absolutely love almost all of them. Like, some were obviously more forgettable than others, but I for sure didn't hate any of them. And so I was talking about how this does explore, a concise set of themes. So what are those themes? These are the themes of free will, control, nature versus nurture, the idea of destiny. What if something is just inescapable? What do all these things mean? What is the point of purpose if you don't have a choice? And so these are just the themes that are explored from different angles. Sometimes there's more emphasis on there probably is free will. Sometimes the idea is there's no free will. Sometimes it's not about stating that idea, it's just about, here are the set of rules for this scenario and we're just going to live with it. It's so thought-provoking to me, and I was having so much fun compiling my thoughts even for this review because of how much I was thinking while consuming it and after the fact. And on top of that, not only are these thought-provoking stories, they are well-written, engaging stories. When I was reading some of these, my phone didn't exist. I know that's a weird thing to say, but that's how I judge how engaging something is. I'm not distracted by social media or by text messages. I am just so invested in the ideas and the characters that are being presented to me. And I feel like that's what happened here. And yeah, hooked from the beginning, from that first story. I was in it, and I was like, okay, you've spoken. I now trust you with anything you publish. I will read it. And in addition to a really wonderful writing style, it's tonally not pessimistic. A lot of times in science fiction, it's, we're discussing the future, and the future is bleak. Rightfully so. We have not set ourselves up very well thus far in current times, with the climate change, with racial divides, with our political divides, with the economy. There's a lot of doom and gloom to predict. Here, it's less about predicting the doom and gloom and more about taking the realistic approach, which doesn't mean it's happy. There are melancholy moments. There are new challenges we have to deal with, but it's approached more from, say we're predicting the cell phone in a sci-fi novel, which I don't think anyone really did, at least not one I've read yet, so it probably exists, I just haven't read it. But say we're approaching that, and the story isn't necessarily about how everyone gets sucked into their phones and there's a lack of globalization. It's more about, how does your relationship with your community change because of this new addition? Because there is change. We should accept that there's change when there's new technology. And I appreciated that, especially nowadays. There's a lot to be pessimistic about. So to just be able to have these thoughts without thinking, oh no, everything's horrible, was a pleasant experience for me. So, what are you going to find in these short stories? What are some stories? I'm going to tease you some synopses, not all of them, although I thought about doing all of them, but I'll just highlight a few and you can decide if these things interest you. But there's one that explores the idea of, what if you can talk to your future self or your past self? That's totally allowed. But what if it doesn't matter? What if you're told straight up, yeah, you can go talk to them. It won't change anything. What does that mean? What would you do? What does the character do? It was really, really fun story. You have one where we've all had some form of Neopets in our life. I mean, it might not have been Neopets, but maybe you started a World of Warcraft character. Maybe you're playing Animal Crossing right now. We've all been consumed by a virtual world with virtual things that we're responsible for. Well, what if those things were actually artificial intelligence? What if they had consciences? What if they needed to be raised? What does that mean? And what does that mean in a world where we do constantly have software fads, where things go in and out of fashion, where technology gets updated, but not everything gets updated with it? What does that mean? And it's just such an interesting approach to AI in general. So, like, that story was great. I'm going to try not to go into it too much, but, like, that's a whole story in here that stole my heart. My favorite story discusses memory. It discusses our relationship to memory. What does it mean if you did have access to perfect recall? How does that change your experience with yourself, your identification of yourself? Because memory is part of how we define ourselves, our experiences, our recollections. And then what if you're told that this isn't the first time we've had to deal with this kind of technology? You know, it's not the first time that a technology's come around to make memory more concrete. And what does that mean? Gosh, I loved that story. And the last two I'll mention actually were the premises for some Hugo nominees, but what if we actually had the science to back up creationism? That thought is valid, so religion and science can be extremely tied. But then what if the assumption that creationism has, where that, you know, everything was created to be centered around our universe, our humanity, is proven false by the same science? What does that mean for you and your purpose? And then the last one I'll mention, what if you could talk to a parallel version of yourself in a different universe who made one different decision from you? What does that mean for your mental health? What does that mean for society? There are so many stories here that I want to unpack for days. So if you have read this short story collection and want to talk about any of the stories, please comment below. Just put spoiler tags if you bring anything up. And, you know, I just would love to have more conversations. And if there are any of these stories that you have read that you want deeper dives into, I am currently trying to coax one of my friends who does short story discussions to go into them in more detail because she is wonderful at it. But if I get enough interest, I will do that myself. There are some of these I could spend days thinking about. But I'm hoping you have a better sense of if these short stories are for you. I will say, my one critique as I was reviewing this is that we don't discuss society from an economic or racial lens in terms of disparity between classes. And I think that's something that could have been and should have been discussed. But in general, these are not topics that are gone into here. And I don't think that makes me enjoy the collection less, but it's something I wish was added in because I think that's a part of what could have been explored with free will. I think there could have been a story that looks at a person's life and how hard they could be trying to change their social circumstance, but they can't because of their economic status or their racial, identification. Like, these are things I was thinking about. So, on a whole though, I love this book. I will be getting the first short story collection and devouring it. And with that, like if you liked it, subscribe if you want to, and I hope you're having a wonderful day. Bye.